A paralyzed woman, a stone archway dusted with snow, Christmas Eve in a small Wisconsin town where everyone else had somewhere to be, everyone except her, invisible to a world too busy celebrating to notice her. But one person noticed. A 6-year-old girl with a teal coat and a heart too big for her small body. A girl who would ask one simple question that would shatter years of loneliness, rewrite the meaning of family, and lead to a miracle that no doctor could explain. Before we continue, please tell us, where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel. Ember Drake tugged her father's hand, her breath forming small clouds in the December air. "Can we go to Rosie's?" Ember asked, bouncing on her heels. "Already made a reservation. Let's go, kiddo." They walked toward the park entrance, Ember chattering about what Santa might bring her, about whether reindeer really ate carrots, about 100 other things that 6-year-olds wonder about on Christmas Eve. But as they approached the stone archway, Ember fell silent. Her steps slowed. Lawson noticed immediately. "Ember, what's wrong?" Ember stared ahead, her brow furrowed in that way that made her look far older than 6. "Daddy," she whispered, "that lady was here when we came in." Lawson followed her gaze. The woman was still there. 2 hours had passed. Families had come and gone. The park had grown quieter as people headed home to warm dinners and wrapped presents. Vendors were packing up their carts. The ice rink would close soon. But this woman remained in the exact same spot, alone, watching the Christmas tree lights flicker in the distance. "She's been here the whole time," Ember said, her voice small and serious, "all by herself." Lawson looked at the woman properly for the first time. He saw the way her shoulders hunched against the cold, the way her eyes glistened with something that looked like grief, the way she seemed to be waiting for something or someone who wasn't coming. Before he could say anything, Ember let go of his hand. "Ember," he started, but she was already moving, her small boots crunching through the snow as she approached the woman. The woman looked up, startled, as this tiny girl in a teal coat and matching mittens stopped in front of her wheelchair. "Hi," Ember said, her voice clear and earnest. "I'm Ember. I saw you when me and my daddy came to the park, and you were sitting here all alone. And now we're leaving, and you're still here all alone." The woman blinked, as if trying to process that someone was actually speaking to her. Ember tilted her head, her brow furrowed with concern. "Don't you have anybody to spend Christmas with?" The woman's face crumpled for just a moment before she caught herself. When she spoke, her voice was soft, barely audible above the distant music. "No, sweetheart, I don't." Ember nodded slowly, processing this information with the gravity only a 6-year-old could muster. Then her face brightened. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" The woman stared at Ember as if the child had just spoken a foreign language. Lawson arrived then, slightly out of breath, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and something softer, something that looked like understanding. "I'm so sorry," he said quickly. "Ember, you can't just—" "But Daddy," Ember interrupted, her tiny hands planted on her hips in a gesture so reminiscent of her mother that Lawson's chest tightened. "She doesn't have anybody. She told me. And it's Christmas. Nobody should be alone on Christmas." She looked up at her father with those enormous brown eyes that could melt steel. "You always tell me that sharing is caring, and we can share our dinner, can't we?" Lawson looked at his daughter, then at the woman in the wheelchair. Really looked at her. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Her blonde hair fell in waves from beneath her cap. Her hands, folded in her lap, were trembling slightly, though whether from cold or emotion he couldn't tell. There was something haunted in her eyes, something that recognized loneliness because he'd seen it in his own mirror for months after Meredith died. The woman started to shake her head. "You don't have to." "I know," Lawson said simply. His voice was kind. "But we'd like to, if you'd like to. Please come. I bet you haven't smiled in a really long time. Rosie's has really good pie. Pie makes everybody smile." The woman looked down at this child who had appeared out of nowhere with an invitation that felt like a lifeline. Her throat worked as she tried to find words. "My name is Myra," she finally managed. "Myra Daniels." "That's a pretty name," Ember said, matter-of-factly. "Will you come?"
Myra felt something crack inside her chest, a wall she had built so carefully over the past 26 years suddenly developing a fissure. "Okay," she whispered. "I'd like that." As they made their way toward Rosie's diner, Lawson walking beside Myra's wheelchair while Ember skipped ahead, already chattering about the best items on the menu, Myra's mind was reeling. When had someone last invited her anywhere? When had someone last noticed she existed? 3 years. 3 years since the accident that had stolen her legs, her career, her identity. 3 years since Adrian had looked at her with pity instead of love and quietly ended their engagement. 3 years of physical therapy appointments that led nowhere, of disability checks that barely covered rent, of empty apartments and emptier days. And before that, a lifetime of foster homes where she'd never been wanted. 7 different houses by the time she was 12. 7 families who had made it clear she was temporary, a responsibility, a burden. Dance had been her escape, the only place she'd ever felt beautiful, valued, seen. She'd clawed her way out of the system through scholarships and sheer desperation, landed a position with the Milwaukee Contemporary Dance Company by 23. For 3 glorious years, she'd had a life, a purpose, a future. Then a teenager had fallen asleep at the wheel. Myra's car had been hit so hard that the steering column had crushed into her chest. Her spinal cord had survived, but barely. Incomplete paralysis, the doctors had called it. Some sensation remained, some limited movement, but her dancing days were over. So was everything else, apparently.
Tonight, she'd come to the park because staying in her apartment felt unbearable. Christmas was the worst day of the year when you had no one. She'd told herself she'd just watch the lights for a bit, feel like part of the world even if she was only observing from the outside. But watching had only made it worse. She'd been about to leave when a small voice had interrupted her thoughts. "Do you want to have dinner with us?" Now she was rolling toward a diner with a man and his daughter who were strangers, and she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything remotely like hope. Rosie's Diner was exactly what its name promised. The smell of home cooking filled the air, roasted turkey, fresh baked bread, cinnamon and sugar. A hostess led them to a window booth, helping Myra transfer from her wheelchair to the seat. Lawson folded the wheelchair and set it aside. The first few minutes were awkward. Myra wasn't used to conversation anymore. Her social skills had grown rusty from months of isolation. She kept waiting for them to realize they'd made a mistake, to find an excuse to end the evening early. But Ember had a way of filling silences with questions that demanded answers. "What's your favorite color?" Myra blinked. "Teal." Ember's eyes went wide. "Really? Daddy, did you hear that? Teal is my favorite too. That's why I picked this coat. I told Daddy I wanted to look like the ocean." A small smile tugged at Myra's lips. "You do look like the ocean. A very cute ocean." Ember giggled and bounced in her seat. "What's your favorite animal?" "I've always loved butterflies." "Because they're pretty?" "Because they transform," Myra said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "They start as one thing and become something completely different." Ember considered this with remarkable seriousness for a 6-year-old. "Like magic?" "Something like that." "What were you before you transformed?" Myra's throat tightened. She glanced at Lawson, who was watching her with kind eyes that held no pity, just curiosity, just openness. "I was a dancer," soft Myra said. "A princess, like in the movies?" "Not quite," Myra said, a sad smile crossing her face, "but I loved it. Dancing was everything to me." "What happened?" "Ember," Lawson said gently, "that might be a personal question." "It's okay," Myra said, though her voice wavered slightly. She was surprised to find that she wanted to answer, wanted someone to know. "I was in a car accident 3 years ago. My spinal cord was damaged. Incomplete paralysis, they call it. I can still feel my legs, and I can move them a little, but they can't support my weight. That's why I'm in this chair." Ember's face fell. She looked at the wheelchair folded against the wall, then back at Myra's face. Her lower lip began to tremble. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes," Myra admitted, "but not as much anymore." Ember didn't say anything.
She just slid out of her seat, walked around to Myra's side of the booth, and wrapped her arms around Myra in a fierce hug.
"I'm sorry you got hurt," Ember mumbled into Myra's sweater. "And I'm sorry you don't have anybody. That's the saddest thing I ever heard." Myra felt tears slip down her cheeks before she could stop them. She couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged her, couldn't remember the last time someone had cared enough to be sad for her. "Thank you, Ember," she managed to say, her voice breaking. When Ember finally returned to her seat, she looked at Myra with fierce determination. "You have us now, right, Daddy?" Lawson had been watching the exchange quietly, something unreadable in his expression. When Ember addressed him, he seemed to come back to himself. "Right," he said softly. "She has us now." The rest of dinner passed in easier conversation. Ember dominated most of it, telling Myra about her stuffed animal collection in extraordinary detail. "I have 17 bears, 3 bunnies, and 1 elephant named Peanut. Peanut is my favorite because he's the oldest. Daddy gave him to me when I was born." "That's very special," Myra said. "Do you have any stuffed animals?" Myra hesitated. "I used to, when I was little, but I moved around a lot, and I lost them along the way." "That's sad," Ember said. She thought for a moment, then declared, "I'll share Peanut with you. He can be half yours." Myra's chest felt tight. "That's very kind of you." Lawson shared stories about his work as an electrician, his tone light and self-deprecating. "Last month, I accidentally knocked out power to the mayor's house right in the middle of a dinner party. Turns out mayors get very cranky when their soufflés collapse." Myra laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months. The sound surprised her. "How did you fix it?" asked Myra. "Very quickly and with a lot of apologizing. The mayor's wife gave me cookies afterward, though, so I think I'm forgiven." Ember added her own commentary. "Daddy's really good at fixing things. He fixed my dollhouse when the stairs broke, and he fixed the toaster when it started shooting sparks." "The toaster incident was more dramatic than it needed to be," Lawson admitted. Throughout the meal, Myra noticed that Lawson deflected any questions about his personal life with practiced ease. When she asked about Ember's school, he answered. When she asked about Cedarbrook, he told her about the town's quirks and characters. But when she gently asked, "Is Ember's mother?" he simply said, "It's just the two of us now," and changed the subject. Myra understood. She didn't push. Some wounds were too fresh to share with strangers, even kind strangers who invited you to dinner. When the meal ended and the waitress brought the check, Lawson insisted on paying. "You're our guest," said Lawson when Myra tried to protest. Ember had fallen asleep in the booth, her head resting against Myra's arm. The gesture was so trusting, so natural, that Myra's throat tightened again. "She likes you," said Lawson softly, looking at his daughter with such tenderness that Myra had to look away. "She doesn't usually warm up to people this quickly." "She's remarkable," said Myra. "You're raising an extraordinary kid." "I'm trying," said Lawson. There was something heavy in those 2 words. Some days are easier than others.
He gently scooped Ember into his arms. She stirred but didn't wake, just nestled against his shoulder. They walked outside together, the night air crisp and cold. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting down from the dark sky. "Thank you," Myra said, "for tonight, for seeing me." Lawson looked at her for a long moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Would you like to have dinner with us again?" Myra's heart stuttered. "What?" "Ember's going to ask me about you tomorrow, probably within 5 minutes of waking up, and honestly," he paused, adjusting his daughter's weight in his arms, "I'd like to see you again too, if you'd like that." Myra felt something unfamiliar blooming in her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'd like that very much," she whispered. Lawson smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. "Good. I make really good pancakes. They're shaped like Mickey Mouse. Well, kind of, if you squint." Myra laughed. "I've never had Mickey Mouse pancakes." "Then you have to come. Ember will be heartbroken otherwise." They exchanged phone numbers. Lawson promised to call. As Myra wheeled herself home that night, the streets quiet and glittering with Christmas lights, she realized something had shifted inside her. For 3 years, she had been frozen in place, not just physically, but emotionally. She had stopped hoping for anything because hope had only ever led to disappointment. Everyone left. Everyone always left. But tonight, a little girl in a teal coat had taken her hand and refused to let her be invisible. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something. Lawson called on New Year's Day. "Ember won't stop asking about you," he said, and Myra could hear the smile in his voice. "She wants to know if you like Mickey Mouse pancakes." "I told you I've never had them." "Then you have to come. She'll be heartbroken otherwise. How does this afternoon sound?" Myra found herself at Lawson's modest house a few hours later, her heart beating faster than it should as she wheeled up the ramp he'd clearly built himself. The house was small but warm, filled with the smell of pancakes and the sound of Ember's laughter. "Myra!" Ember shrieked when she opened the door, launching herself at Myra for a hug. "You came! You came!" "Of course I came," Myra said, hugging her back. "I wouldn't miss Mickey Mouse pancakes." The kitchen was chaos in the best possible way. Lawson stood at the stove, flour dusting his shirt, a spatula in one hand. Ember was helping, which seemed to involve getting flour on every available surface. "Daddy, you're doing it wrong," Ember insisted. "The ears are too small." "The ears are fine," Lawson protested. "They're baby ears. Mickey doesn't have baby ears." Myra laughed, and both Drakes turned to look at her with matching grins. "You're on Ember's side, aren't you?" Lawson said with mock offense. "The ears are a little small," Myra admitted. Ember pumped her fist in victory. "See? Myra knows about ears." After breakfast, which featured slightly improved ear proportions, Ember ran off to find Peanut the elephant, insisting Myra needed to meet him properly. Lawson and Myra were left alone in the living room. The silence stretched between them, comfortable but weighted with unspoken things. Myra noticed what the house didn't have. No family photos on the walls, no pictures of a woman who should be there, just a few framed drawings that Ember had clearly made, and a single photograph of Lawson and Ember at what looked like a beach. "Can I ask you something?" Myra said finally. "Of course." "Ember's mother." Myra hesitated. "You don't have to answer. I just noticed there aren't many pictures around, and you haven't mentioned her." Lawson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, like sandpaper over wood. "Her name was Meredith. She passed away 2 years ago, a rare autoimmune condition." Myra's breath caught. "I'm so sorry." "It happened fast." Lawson stared at his hands, as if they held answers he hadn't found yet. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We barely had time to understand what was happening before she was gone. That's... Myra couldn't find words big enough. "I can't imagine." Ember was only 4 when it happened. She remembers her, but the memories are getting fuzzier. He swallowed hard. "I don't know if that's a mercy or just another kind of loss." Myra reached out without thinking and touched his hand, just briefly, just enough to say, "I understand." "Before Meredith died," Lawson continued, his voice breaking slightly, "she made me promise something. She made me promise to make sure Ember knew joy, not just happiness, joy, the deep-down kind that makes life worth living." He looked up, and Myra saw tears in his eyes. "That's what I'm trying to do, every single day. Just make sure my little girl knows joy." "You're doing a good job," Myra said softly. "Ember is one of the happiest children I've ever met. That's because of you." Before Lawson could respond, Ember came thundering back into the room, clutching Peanut the elephant. "This is Peanut. He's my best stuffed animal ever. I want you to meet him because you're special." Myra accepted the elephant with the solemnity the moment deserved. "Hello, Peanut. It's very nice to meet you." "Peanut says he likes you," Ember declared. "He wants you to come over all the time." Myra glanced at Lawson, who was smiling despite the tears still shining in his eyes. "Well," Myra said, "I guess I'd better listen to Peanut." What followed was gradual, a friendship built on shared meals and park visits and quiet conversations while Ember played nearby. January turned to February. February became March. Myra learned more about Meredith through the stories Lawson told when Ember wasn't listening, about the promise he'd made, about learning to braid hair from YouTube tutorials at 2 in the morning, about hosting tea parties with stuffed animals, and becoming both mother and father to a child who had her mother's eyes and her mother's stubborn streak. Lawson learned about Myra's foster care background, about growing up unwanted, passed from house to house like a library book no one wanted to keep, about finding salvation in dance only to have it stripped away, about Adrian, who had promised forever and delivered 6 months. They were two people carrying grief, finding comfort in someone who understood that some wounds never fully heal, they just become part of who you are. Winter turned to spring. Myra began joining them for more than meals, movie nights at Lawson's house, where Ember insisted on sitting between them with a bowl of popcorn. Sunday afternoons at the park, watching Ember chase butterflies and declare she was going to catch one and keep it as a pet. "Butterflies don't like to be kept," Myra told her gently. "They need to be free." "Like you?" Ember asked with startling insight. Myra had to look away. "Yeah, like me." In April, Ember had her first-grade dance recital. Myra sat in the audience, watching these children spin and leap with varying degrees of coordination, and found tears streaming down her face. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was something more complicated. A grief for what she'd lost, yes, but also a strange, unexpected joy at being able to witness this, at being included in this moment that mattered to Ember. After the recital, Ember ran over in her pink tutu, breathless and glowing. "Did you see me? Did you see my pirouette?" "I saw everything," Myra said, pulling her into a hug. "You were beautiful." "Will you teach me more moves, please? Daddy tries, but he's not very good at dancing." Lawson laughed. "It's true, I have the grace of a startled moose." So Myra began teaching Ember what she could. Not the technical precision of ballet, that required standing, required a body that worked in ways Myra's no longer did. But she taught Ember about arm movements, about how to tell stories with your body, about the emotions that different dances could express. "Dancing isn't just about the steps," Myra explained one afternoon, demonstrating a porte de bras from her wheelchair. "It's about what you're trying to say. Every movement means something." Ember watched with rapt attention, mimicking Myra's arm positions with endearing seriousness. "What does this one mean?" she asked, extending her arms overhead. "That one is reaching for something you want but can't quite touch, like a dream." "Or like trying to catch butterflies," Ember said. "Exactly like that." Spring turned to summer, and the thing neither Lawson nor Myra had been willing to name grew harder to ignore. It lived in the lingering looks across the dinner table, in the way Lawson's hand would brush against Myra's when he handed her a glass of water and neither of them would pull away, in the late-night phone conversations that lasted hours, where they talked about everything and nothing, and the silence between words felt as meaningful as the words themselves. Myra told herself it was just friendship. Lawson told himself he was just being kind. But Ember, with the clarity that only children possessed, saw right through them. "Daddy looks at you funny," she observed one afternoon, completely unprompted. Myra felt heat rise to her cheeks. "What do you mean?" "Like smiley eyes. He does smiley eyes at you all the time." "I think you're imagining things, sweetheart." But Ember just gave her a knowing look that was far too old for 6. In July, on a morning when Lawson was making waffles and Ember was theoretically setting the table, but actually just arranging the napkins into elaborate shapes, she asked the question that changed everything. "Are you and Myra going to get married?" Lawson choked on his coffee. "What? Ember, where is this coming from?" "Because you love her," Ember said matter-of-factly, as casually as if she were discussing the weather. "And she loves you, I can tell. And when people love each other, they get married. That's how it works." It's more complicated than that, sweetheart." Ember fixed him with a look that would have made her mother proud. "No, it's not. You're just scared." Lawson opened his mouth to argue, but Ember wasn't finished. "Mommy would want you to be happy," she said, her voice suddenly serious. "And Myra makes you happy. I can see it. You smile more now. Real smiles, not the sad ones you used to do." Lawson stared at his daughter, this tiny person who had inherited her mother's wisdom and her mother's stubborn streak, and felt something break open in his chest. She was right about all of it. He was in love with Myra Daniels. Somewhere between Mickey Mouse pancakes and late-night phone calls, between watching her teach his daughter about dance and listening to her laugh at his terrible jokes, he had fallen completely, irrevocably in love. And he was terrified, because he'd already lost one person he loved. He knew what that pain felt like, knew how it could hollow you out and leave you gasping for air in the middle of ordinary moments. But he also knew what Meredith had told him in those final days. "Don't let grief make you small," she had whispered. "Don't let it keep you from living. Promise me you'll keep your heart open." He had promised. And now here was Ember, their daughter, giving him permission to keep that promise. "You're right," Lawson said softly. "I am scared. But maybe it's time to be brave." Ember grinned. "So you are gonna marry her?" "I'm going to ask her. There's a difference." "She'll say yes," Ember said with absolute certainty. "I know she will." "How do you know?" "Because she does smiley eyes at you too, Daddy, all the time." Lawson began planning the proposal for Christmas Eve exactly 1 year after the night they'd met. The symmetry felt right. The location would be Riverside Park at the stone archway where Ember had first approached Myra's wheelchair. He bought a ring, nothing extravagant, Myra wouldn't want that, but beautiful in its simplicity, a diamond set in white gold, delicate and timeless. He told Ember, who promptly became the worst secret keeper in Wisconsin. "I know something you don't know," she would sing-song to Myra during their visits. "Oh yeah? What's that?" "I can't tell you. It's a secret, but it's a really good secret, the best secret ever." Myra would laugh and ruffle Ember's hair, assuming it was some childhood game. She had no idea. But Myra had a secret of her own. 2 weeks before Christmas Eve, Myra was at her regular physical therapy appointment with Ingrid, her therapist of 3 years. They were going through the same routine they'd followed dozens of times: stretches, exercises, maintenance work to keep her muscles from atrophying further. Neither of them expected anything to change. Then Ingrid noticed something. "Myra, hold on." She frowned, pressing her fingers against Myra's calf. "Can you feel this?" "A little," Myra said. She had always retained some sensation in her legs. That was normal for incomplete paralysis. "Why?" Ingrid moved her hand lower to a spot just above Myra's ankle, an area that had been completely numb since the accident. "What about here?" Myra's breath caught. She could feel it. Not fully, not sharply, but unmistakably. That's new," she whispered. Ingrid's eyes widened. "I need to run some tests. Don't move." The next hour passed in a blur of assessments and measurements, reflex tests, sensation mapping, strength evaluations. Finally, Ingrid sat back, her expression caught between professional caution and genuine excitement. "Myra, I need you to not get your hopes up too much, but I think your nerve pathways have been regenerating." Myra stared at her. "What does that mean?" "It means the damage to your spinal cord wasn't as permanent as we thought. Sometimes, very rarely, the nervous system can heal spontaneously over time, so gradually that no one notices until suddenly there's a measurable difference." "So I can feel my ankle." "You can feel your ankle, and possibly more." Ingrid leaned forward. "With intensive rehabilitation, and I mean intensive, Myra, multiple sessions per week, there's a real possibility you could regain significant function." Myra's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "How significant?" "I don't want to make promises, but—" Ingrid paused. "I think you might be able to walk again." The words hung in the air between them. Walk. For 3 years, Myra had accepted her wheelchair as permanent. She had built her identity around it, grieved the loss of her mobility, made peace with a future on wheels. And now this woman was telling her that future might change. "I need to see a neurologist," Myra said, her voice shaking. "I need more tests. I'll make the referrals today. But Myra, Even if the tests confirm what I think they will, this won't be easy. Relearning to walk after 3 years, it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. I don't care. I don't care if it's hard. I need to know if it's possible. The neurologist confirmed it 3 days later. Spontaneous neurological recovery, extraordinarily rare, a medical near miracle. With intensive physical therapy, Myra had a real chance. She sat in her car in the hospital parking lot afterward, staring at the paperwork in her shaking hands, and made a decision. She wouldn't tell Lawson. Not yet. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was that she didn't trust this, didn't trust hope. Hope had betrayed her too many times before.
What if she failed? What if she worked for weeks and couldn't do it? What if she got his hopes up and then crushed them? But there was another reason, one that lived deeper in her heart. If she could do this, if she could actually walk again, she wanted it to be a gift. Ember had let something slip the week before. "Daddy's planning something special for Christmas," she had said, then immediately clapped her hand over her mouth. "I wasn't supposed to tell you that." Myra had a feeling she knew what that something special might be. And if Lawson was going to propose, if he was going to ask her to be his wife, to be Ember's mother, then she wanted to give him something in return. She wanted to walk to him. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of Myra's life. She worked with Ingrid every single day, twice a day when she could manage it. Standing was agony. Her legs had forgotten how to bear weight. Her muscles screamed. Her balance was non-existent. The first time she stood between the parallel bars, she lasted exactly 4 seconds before her legs gave out. She cried that night, cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen. But the next day she tried again. 4 seconds became 10. 10 became 30. 30 became a full minute. Then came the steps. 1 step between the bars, her arms taking most of her weight. Then 2, then 3. Each one felt impossible. Each one felt like climbing a mountain with broken legs. But she kept going. She practiced in secret, scheduling her sessions for times when she knew Lawson would be at work. She lied and said she was trying out forearm crutches just to see. He'd looked at her with hope and concern, but hadn't pushed for details. On December 22nd, 2 days before Christmas Eve, Myra took 12 steps without the parallel bars. 12 unsteady, trembling, miraculous steps across Ingrid's therapy room. She collapsed afterward, sobbing into her hands, while Ingrid held her and whispered, "You did it. You actually did it. I need to do it again. I need to be sure." So she practiced, again and again, walking the length of the room, learning how to trust her legs, learning how to move in a way she hadn't moved in 3 years. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke up with a plan. She wouldn't bring her wheelchair tonight, just her forearm crutches. And when Lawson proposed, because she knew in her bones that he would, she would give him his answer in the most spectacular way possible. She would walk. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear, the sky the color of winter twilight. Myra met Lawson and Ember at Riverside Park, her heart pounding beneath her coat. Ember was practically vibrating with excitement. "This is going to be the best Christmas ever," she kept saying. "The best one." "Ember," Lawson said warningly, "remember what we talked about." I know, it's a secret." She minded zipping her lips, then immediately added, "But it's a really good secret." Myra laughed, though her hands were trembling on her crutches. She'd told Lawson she was trying them out, and he'd accepted the explanation with cautious optimism. He didn't know what she'd been doing for the past 2 weeks, didn't know about the hours of secret training, didn't know that this morning she'd walked 20 steps unassisted in Ingrid's office. Her legs were still weak, still unsteady, but they worked. For the first time in 3 years, they actually worked. When they reached the stone archway, the exact spot where Ember had first approached her 1 year ago, Lawson stopped. "Let's take a picture here," he said, his voice slightly unsteady. "This spot is special." "This is where I found you," Ember announced, bouncing on her toes. "Remember, you were all alone and sad, and I asked if you wanted to have dinner with us, and you said yes, and now you're not alone anymore." Myra's eyes filled with tears.
I remember, sweetheart. Several people had gathered nearby, sensing something important was about to happen. The park was decorated for Christmas, lights strung through the trees, the massive Christmas tree glowing in the center. Lawson took a deep breath. Then he lowered himself to one knee in the snow. Ember squealed. A woman nearby gasped. "Myra," Lawson began, his voice thick with emotion. "1 year ago, my daughter did something brave and kind. She saw a stranger who was hurting, and she refused to look away. She brought you into our lives, and I cannot imagine our lives without you anymore." Myra's hands flew to her mouth. "I know we've both lost a lot. I know we've both been broken in ways that don't fully heal, but I've learned this year that broken things can still be beautiful, that two people carrying grief can also carry joy." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple diamond ring that caught the Christmas lights and threw them back in 1,000 directions. "Myra Daniels, will you marry me?" For a moment, Myra couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. She looked at this man kneeling in the snow, at the little girl bouncing beside him with barely contained excitement, at the ring glittering in his trembling hand. And then she made her decision. "Yes," she whispered, "but first, I have something to show you." She handed her crutches to Ember, who took them with wide, confused eyes. "Myra?" Lawson started to rise. "What are you—" "Stay there," Myra said softly. "Please, just stay there."
And then, with the snow falling gently around her, and the Christmas tree glittering in the distance, and a crowd of strangers holding their breath, Myra took a step. Lawson's face went white. She took another step, then another. Her legs trembled, her balance wavered, but she didn't fall. "Myra," Lawson breathed, tears streaming down his face. "How? What?" "The doctors found something," Myra said, her own tears spilling over as she took another shaky step toward him. "The nerves have been healing. Slowly, all this time, they've been healing." Another step. "I've been working with my therapist for 2 weeks. I wanted to surprise you." Another step. "I wanted to walk to my future." Her voice broke. "I wanted to walk to you." She took one more step, and her legs gave out. But Lawson was there. He surged up from his knee and caught her, wrapping his arms around her, holding her up, holding her close. They stood there in the snow, tangled together, both of them sobbing. "You walked," Lawson kept saying. "You walked. You actually walked." "I walked," Myra repeated, laughing through her tears. "I walked to you." Ember crashed into them, her small arms wrapping around their legs. "Myra can walk!" she screamed at maximum volume to the entire park. "Everybody look! Myra can walk, and my daddy is going to marry her!"
The crowd that had gathered burst into applause. Someone cheered. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. A teenager was filming on his phone, tears running down his face. Lawson cupped Myra's face in his hands, looking at her like she was the most miraculous thing he had ever seen. "I don't care if you walk or roll," he said fiercely. "I love you exactly as you are. I would have loved you forever in that chair." "I know," said Myra. "That's why I wanted to do this, because you never asked me to change. You never needed me to be anything other than what I was. And somehow, loving you, being loved by you, it healed something in me." She touched his face, wiping away his tears with her thumbs. "Not just my legs, everything." Lawson kissed her then, deep and long, while Ember made exaggerated gagging noises beside them, and the crowd cheered louder. "Ew, kissing!" They broke apart laughing, foreheads pressed together, both of them still crying. "So," Lawson said, his voice still shaky, "is that a yes to the whole marriage thing?" Myra laughed, a bright, joyful sound that she barely recognized as her own. "Yes," said Myra, 1,000 times yes. Ember grabbed both their hands. "We're going to be a family," she shouted. "A real family. Myra's going to be my mom. Well, my other mom, because I already have a mom in heaven. But now I'll have a mom on earth, too." Myra knelt down, actually knelt, her legs protesting but holding, and pulled Ember into her arms. "I would be honored to be your earth mom," she said softly. Ember hugged her tight. Then she pulled back and whispered, "I knew it. I knew when I saw you in the park that first time. I knew you were supposed to be ours." "How did you know?" Ember shrugged, as if the answer were obvious. "Because you looked like you needed a family, and we had extra love, so it just made sense."
Myra looked at this child, this extraordinary, compassionate, wise beyond her years child who had changed everything with a single question on a cold December night. "You're right," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It does make sense." They married on a golden afternoon the following September in a small ceremony at Riverside Park. The guest list was modest: Lawson's colleagues from the electrical company, neighbors from Cedar Brook who had watched their relationship blossom, Ingrid, the physical therapist who had helped Myra learn to walk again, and Dr. Harrison, the neurologist who had delivered the news that changed everything. Ember walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals with great enthusiasm and occasionally stopping to wave at people she recognized. She wore a teal dress, because it's me and Myra's favorite color, Daddy, obviously, and a crown of white daisies in her hair. Then the music changed. The guests rose. Lawson, standing beneath the flower-covered arch, held his breath, and Myra appeared at the end of the aisle. She wore a simple ivory dress, elegant and understated, with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. Her blonde hair was loose around her shoulders. She carried a cane. She still needed it for longer distances, and probably always would. The doctors had been clear that her recovery, while remarkable, had limits. But she walked. One careful step at a time, she walked toward her future. The guests whispered. Some wept openly. Ember bounced at the altar, barely containing herself. Lawson's mother stood nearby, ready to help if needed, but Myra moved forward on her own. When she finally reached Lawson, he took her hands in his, tears streaming down his face. "You walked," he whispered. "I walked," she said. "To you. Always to you." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Their vows spoke of loss and healing, of second chances and unexpected gifts, of a little girl who had brought them together with one brave question. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ember didn't wait for permission. She launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around their waists. "We're a family now," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "A real family." Myra looked down at her daughter, and felt something she had never truly felt before in her 27 years of life. Home. She was finally home. Not in a place, not in a building, but in the arms of a man who loved her exactly as she was, and a child who had chosen her before anyone else did. She had spent her entire life being unwanted, passed from foster home to foster home, abandoned by her father before she could remember his face, left behind when her body stopped working the way it should. But now, because a 6-year-old girl had refused to let a stranger be invisible on Christmas Eve, she had everything she never dared to dream of. A husband who saw her strength instead of her brokenness, a daughter who loved her unconditionally, and legs that, against all medical odds, had remembered how to carry her forward into a future she'd stopped believing in. As the reception continued and the September sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, Myra stood with Lawson's arm around her waist, watching Ember dance with wild abandon to music only she could hear. "What are you thinking about?" Lawson asked softly. Myra smiled. "I'm thinking about butterflies." "Yeah?" "You remember what I told Ember about how they transform?" "I remember. I used to think that's what I needed to do. Transform into something completely different, someone who could dance again, someone who wasn't broken." She turned to look at her husband. "But I was wrong. I didn't need to transform. I just needed someone to see that even broken things can be beautiful. Even broken things can fly." Lawson kissed her forehead. "You were always beautiful. I just helped you remember." Ember ran over, breathless and glowing. "Myra, Daddy, come dance with me." "I don't know if I can dance like you do, sweetheart," Myra said. "That's okay. You can dance however you want. Dancing isn't about the steps, remember? It's about what you're trying to say." Myra laughed, that bright, free laugh that still surprised her when she heard it. "You're absolutely right.
She took Lawson's hand, took Ember's hand, and there, in Riverside Park, under the same trees where a lonely woman had once sat in a wheelchair on Christmas Eve, Myra danced. Not the way she used to, not with the precision and grace of her former life, but with joy, with her family, with her whole, beautiful, impossibly perfect life. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that miracles can happen when we choose compassion over indifference, please subscribe and share this with someone who needs hope today. Because sometimes the greatest gift we can give is simply asking, "Do you want to have dinner with us?"